Sometimes in life, you have to make some hard decisions. So let's get into the 2020 books that I've cut from my list, but that you may still want to read. So when I first thought about starting a YouTube channel, I wanted to strictly stick to 2020 releases. This was at the end of 2019, and I came up with a list of like 55 books. Unfortunately, I didn't start this channel until May or June of 2021. So 2020 had already come and gone. Half of 2021 was almost done. And I still wanted to read these books that I had thought about reading, Unfortunately, we're already almost to fall of 2021. I have read 17 of the 55 books that I had planned on reading and reviewing and rating. I still have 7 books from 2020 that I still need to read. But there's no way I was going to get through 55 books by the end of 2021, which was my goal when I initially started this channel. So I had to make some really tough decisions. And I cut 15 books. And we're going to get into those right now because I still really wish I could have read these. Unfortunately, I just don't have the time. But you may still want to read some of them, so let's get into them. So to make it a little easier, I've printed out the descriptions from Goodreads for all 15 of these books, and I'm just going to read them to you. And if they appeal to you, then I have done my job. So the first one is going to be the only sci-fi book that actually made it onto my list. I think it's sci-fi. I'm not exactly sure. But that's going to be Alpha Omega by Nicholas Bowling. So here's what the Goodreads description says. With the discovery of a human skull on the playing fields, children displaying symptoms of an unfamiliar grisly virus, and a catastrophic malfunction in the site's security system, the NSA is about to experience a week that no amount of rebranding can conceal. As the school descends into chaos, teacher Tom Rosen goes looking for answers, but when the real, the unreal, and the surreal are indistinguishable, the truth can be difficult to recognize. One pupil, Gabriel Backer, may hold the key to saving the school from destroying itself and its students. Except he has already been expelled. Not only that, he has disappeared down the rabbit hole of Alpha Omega, the world's largest VR role-playing game, filled with violent delights and unbridled debauchery. But the game quickly sours. Gabriel will need to confront the real world he's been so desperate to escape if he ever wants to leave. This was a pretty easy cut for me. I don't know why it even made it on my list. I guess because they found a skull at the school. I don't know. So anyway, Alpha Omega. So the next one is going to be a young adult novel, I believe, and that is The Companion by Katie Allender. The other orphans say Margot is lucky. Lucky to survive the horrible accident that killed her family. Lucky to have her own room because she wakes up screaming every night. And finally, lucky to be chosen by a prestigious family to live at their remote country estate. But it wasn't luck that made the Suttons rescue Margot from her bleak existence at the group home. Margot was handpicked to be a companion to their silent, mysterious daughter, Agatha. At first, helping with Agatha, and getting to know her handsome older brother, seems much better than the group home. But soon, the isolated Gothic house begins playing tricks on Margot's mind, making her question everything she believes about the Suttons and herself. Margot's bad dreams may have stopped when she came to live with Agatha, but the real nightmare has just begun. I may end up regretting not reading this, because we all love creepy kids, right? And I don't know. So that's The Companion. Up next is one that I initially searched out and bought. It was not on Amazon, it was not on eBay, it was not on Barnes & Noble. I actually had to go to the publisher's website, which was Omnipress, I think. And I bought On Sundays, She Picked Flowers by Yaya Schofield. Unfortunately, they had some problems at the publishers, and a month went by and still no book. I ended up emailing the publisher. They said that they were having delays because only one person was running the show, apparently. And it's like, okay, so I let another month go by. And by that point, I was having buyer's remorse because, for one, I paid $24 for this book. And for two, they charged $10 shipping. So $34 for a book seems a little outrageous. Fortunately for me, they were gracious enough to issue me a refund and cancel my order. I really wanted to read it, and unfortunately, it just didn't work out. But here's what this book is about. It's about a woman named Judith who finally escapes her mother to the countryside of Georgia. There she makes a home for herself in a cottage given to her by a relatively kind innkeeper. And it's there she begins her Sunday routine. And it's there she learns of the beings in the woods. And it's also there she meets Nemora, the woman who changes her life in ways Judith never even thought of. This novel is the exploration of transformation, of metamorphosis, closure, retribution, nature, and healing. In this Southern Gothic tale, you will see Judith become undone, redone, and become in incredible ways that is human and more than human. It's a roller coaster of emotion, dealings of familial trauma, love, and mystery. On Sundays, She Picked Flowers is a fascinating story that will keep you on your toes and make you fall in love. So, it sounded really good. Unfortunately, I had to drop it. So next up we have The Blade Between by Sam J. Miller. Ronan Zapesi promised himself he'd never return to Hudson. The sleepy upstate town was no place for a restless gay photographer. But his father is ill, and New York City's distractions have become too much for him. He hopes that a quick visit will help him recharge. Ronan reconnects with two friends from high school, Dom, his first love, and Dom's wife, Adela. The three former misfits mourn what their town has become, overrun by gentrifiers and corporate interests. With friends and neighbors getting evicted en masse and a mayoral election coming up, Ronan and Adela craft a plan to rattle the newcomers and expose their true motives. But in doing so, they unleash something far more mysterious and uncontainable. Hudson has a rich, proud history, and it turns out the real estate developers aren't the only forces threatening its well-being. The spirits undergirding this once thriving industrial town are enraged. Ronan's hijinks have overlapped with a bubbling up of hate and violence among friends and neighbors, and everything is spiraling out of control. Ronan must summon the very best of himself to shed his own demons and save the city he once loathed. So, that is The Blade Between. I'm all about reading stories involving gay main characters, but unfortunately it just didn't sound all that scary or thrilling, unfortunately. So anyway, that's The Blade Between. Next up we have The Book of Koli by M.R. Carey. Beyond the walls of the small village of Mythenrud lies an unrecognizable world. A world where overgrown forests are filled with choker trees and deadly vines and seeds that will kill you where you stand. And if they don't get you, one of the dangerous, shunned men will. Kali has lived in Mythenwood his entire life. He knows the first rule of survival is that you don't venture beyond the walls. What he doesn't know is, what happens when you aren't given a choice? The first in a gripping new trilogy, The Book of Koli charts the journey of one unforgettable young boy struggling to find his place in a chilling, post-apocalyptic world. So, this sounded really fun. Unfortunately, I don't read series. I just don't have the patience for it, I guess. And I put this on my book list before I knew it was going to be a series, and I think the second one actually came out in 2020 also. So if you're in this post-apocalyptic series, I would probably suggest checking it out. The Book of Koli. Next up, we have Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. So the only book I've read by Riley Sager is The Final Girls, and that was just okay. It was alright. I've heard Lock Every Door is much better than Home Before Dark, so I guess this was kind of an easy pick to cut. But here's what it's about in case you don't know. What was it like living in that house? Maggie Holt is used to such questions. 25 years ago, she and her parents, Edwin and Jess, moved into Bainbury Hall, a rambling Victorian estate in the Vermont woods. They spent 3 weeks there before fleeing in the dead of night, an ordeal Ewan later recounted in a nonfiction book called House of Horrors. His tale of ghostly happenings and encounters with malevolent spirits become a worldwide phenomenon, rivaling the Amityville horror in popularity and skepticism. Today, Maggie is a restorer of old homes and too young to remember any of the events mentioned in her father's book. But she also doesn't believe a word of it. Ghosts, after all, don't exist. When Maggie inherits Bainbury Hall after her father's death, she returns to renovate the place to prepare it for sale. But her homecoming is anything but warm. People from the past, chronicled in House of Horrors, lurk in the shadows, and locals aren't thrilled that their small town has been made infamous thanks to Maggie's father. Even more unnerving is Bainbury Hall itself, a place filled with relics from another era that hint at a history of dark deeds. As Maggie experiences strange occurrences straight out of her father's book, she starts to believe that what he wrote was more fact than fiction. So, if you're into thriller books, if you're into Riley Sager, I'm sure you will enjoy Home Before Dark. Next, we have a book that I believe was a chunker, and that's why I cut it. And that's going to be The Ghost Tree by Christina Henry. When the 2 bodies of 2 girls are found torn apart in the town of Smith's Hollow, Lauren is surprised, but she also expects that the police won't find the killer. After all, the year before, her father's body was found with his heart missing, and since then everyone has moved on. Even her best friend, Miranda, has become more interested in boys than in spending time at the old ghost tree, the way they used to when they were kids. So when Lauren has a vision of a monster dragging the remains of the girls through the woods, she knows she can't just do nothing. Not like the rest of her town. But as she draws closer to answers, she realizes that the foundation of her seemingly normal town might be rotten at the center, and that if nobody else stands for the missing, she will. So, if you like ghost stories, maybe it's a ghost story, maybe it's a slasher, I don't really know, but it was just too big for me, and that's why I cut it. So, The Ghost Tree. Another chunker of a book that I had to cut was Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. Our story begins in 1902 at the Brookhampton School for Girls. Flo and Clara, 2 impressionable students, are obsessed with each other and with a daring young writer named Mary MacLane, the author of a scandalous book-selling memoir. To show their devotion to Mary, the girls establish their own private club and call it the Plain Bad Heroine Society. They meet in secret in a nearby apple orchard, the setting of their wildest happiness and ultimately of their macabre deaths. This is where their bodies are later discovered, with a copy of Mary's book splayed beside them, the victims of a swarm of stinging, angry yellowjackets. Less than 5 years later, the Brookhampton School for Girls closes its doors forever. But not before 3 more people mysteriously die on the property, each in a most troubling way. Over a century later, the now abandoned and crumbling Brookhampton is back in the news when wonderkind writer Merritt Emmons publishes a breakout book celebrating the queer feminist history surrounding the haunted and cursed Gilded Age institution. Her best-selling book inspires a controversial horror film adaptation, starring celebrity actor and lesbian it girl Harper Harper playing the ill-fated heroine Flo, opposite B-list actress and former child star Audrey Wells as Clara. But as Brookhands opens its gates once again and our three modern heroines arrive on set to begin filming, past and present become grimly entangled, or perhaps just grimly exploited. And soon it's impossible to tell where the curse leaves off and Hollywood begins. Next we have Survivor Song by Paul Tremblay. In a matter of weeks, Massachusetts has been overrun by an insidious rabies-like virus that is spread by saliva. But unlike rabies, the disease has a terrifyingly short incubation period of an hour or less. Those infected quickly lose their minds and are driven to bite and infect as many others as they can before they inevitably succumb. Hospitals are inundated with sick and dying, and hysteria has taken hold. To try to limit its spread, the Commonwealth is under quarantine and curfew, but society is breaking down and the government's emergency protocols are faltering. Dr. Romella Rams Sherman, a soft-spoken pediatrician in her mid-30s, receives a frantic phone call from Natalie, a friend who is 8 months pregnant. Natalie's husband has been killed, viciously attacked by an infected neighbor, and in a failed attempt to save him, Natalie too was bitten. Natalie's only chance of survival is to get to a hospital as quickly as possible to receive a rabies vaccine. The clock is ticking for her and for her unborn child. Natalie's fight for life becomes a desperate odyssey as she and Rams make their way through a hostile landscape filled with dangers beyond their worst nightmares. Terrifying, strange, and sometimes deadly challenges that push them to the brink. So I guess I cut this one because it was too close to current times. I don't know. I liked The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. That's the only one I've read. Maybe we'll get to this one day, but for now, up next is The Patient by Jasper DeWitt. In a series of online posts, Parker H., a young psychiatrist, chronicles the harrowing account of his time working at a dreary mental hospital in New England. Through his internet message board, Harper hopes to communicate with the world his effort to cure one bewildering patient. We learn, as Parker did on his first day at the hospital, of the facility's most difficult, profoundly dangerous case, a 40-year-old man who was originally admitted to the hospital at age 6. This patient has no known diagnosis. His symptoms seem to evolve over time. Every person who has attempted to treat him has been driven to madness or suicide. Desperate and fearful, the hospital's directors keep him strictly confined and allow minimal contact with staff for their own safety. Convinced that releasing him would unleash catastrophe on the outside world, Parker, brilliant and overconfident, takes it upon himself to discover what ails this mystery patient and finally cure him. But from his first encounter with the mystery patient, things spiral out of control, and facing a possibility beyond his wildest imaginings, Parker is forced to question everything he thought he knew. So this sounds like an epistolary story, and it was kind of difficult to cut because it really did sound interesting, but it is what it is. The Patient. So next is The Shadows by Alex North. You knew a teenager like Charlie Crabtree. A dark imagination, a sinister smile, always on the outside of the group. Some part of you suspected he might be capable of doing something awful. 25 years ago, Crabtree did just that, committing a murder so shocking that it's attracted that strange kind of infamy that only exists on the darkest corners of the internet, and inspired more than one copycat. Paul Adams remembers the case all too well. Crabtree and his victim were Paul's friends. Paul has slowly put his life back together, but now his mother, old and senile, has taken a turn for the worse. Though every inch of him resists, it is time to come home. It's not long before things start to go wrong. Reading the news, Paul discovers another copycat has struck. His mother is distressed, insistent that there's something in the house, and someone is following him. Which reminds him of the most unsettling thing about that awful day 25 years ago. It wasn't just the murder. It was the fact that afterward, Charlie Crabtree was never seen again. I've heard that Alex North's first book, I can't remember the name of it, is actually better than The Shadows, so this was relatively easy cut, but you might be interested, so check it out. Next we have The Bright Lands by John Fram. The town of Bentley holds two things dear, its football and its secrets. But when star quarterback Dylan Whitley goes missing, an unremitting fear grips this remote corner of Texas. Joel Whitley was shamed out of conservative Bentley 10 years ago, and while he's finally made a life for himself as a gay man in New York, his younger brother's disappearance soon brings him back to a place he thought he had escaped for good. Meanwhile, Sheriff's Deputy Starsha Clark stayed in Bentley. Joel's return brings back painful memories, not to mention questions, about her own missing brother. And in the high school hallways, Dylan's friends begin to suspect that their classmates know far more than they're telling the police. Together, these unlikely allies will stir up secrets their town has long tried to ignore, drawing the attention of dangerous men who will stop at nothing to see that their crimes stayed buried. But no one is quite prepared to face the darkness that's begun to haunt their nightmares, whispering about a place long thought to be nothing but an urban legend. An empty night, a flicker of light on the horizon, the Bright Lands. Next is one I really had trouble cutting because I really wanted to read it, but there's just too many other ones that might be better. And that is The Loop by Jeremy Robert Johnson. It says, Stranger Things meets World War Z in this heart-racing conspiracy thriller as a lonely young woman teams up with a group of fellow outcasts to survive the night in a town overcome by a science experiment gone wrong. Turner Falls is a small tourist town nestled in the hills of western Oregon. The kind of town you escape to for a vacation. When an inexplicable outbreak rapidly develops, this idyllic town becomes the epicenter of an epidemic of violence as the teenage children of several executives from the local biotech firm become ill and aggressively murderous. Suddenly, the town is on edge, and Lucy and her friends must do everything it takes just to fight through the night. This was another one I had trouble cutting. I hope I made the right decision. That's going to be The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher. Pray they are hungry. Kara finds the words in the mysterious bunker that she's discovered behind a hole in the wall of her uncle's house. Freshly divorced and living back at home, Kara now becomes obsessed with these cryptic words and starts exploring this peculiar area, only to discover that it holds portals to countless alternate realities. But these places are haunted by creatures that seem to hear thoughts, and the more one fears them, the stronger they become. Portals to alternate realities? I can dig it, but unfortunately I had to cut it. If you read it, or if you do read it, please let me know if it was worth it, if I should go back and reconsider. So last on my list is Antioch by Jessica Leonard. Antioch used to be a quiet small town where nothing bad ever happened. Now 6 women have been savagely murdered. The media dubs the killer Vlad the Impaler due to the gruesome crime scenes of his victims. Clues are drying up fast, and the hunt for the monster responsible is hitting a dead end. After picking up a late-night transmission on her shortwave radio, a local bookseller named Bess becomes convinced a 7th victim has already been abducted. Bess is used to spending her nights alone reading about Amelia Earhart conspiracy theories, and now a new mystery has fallen in her lap, one she might actually be able to solve, assuming she doesn't also wind up abducted. So, I kind of really wanted to read that one, but I've heard the ending is kind of abrupt and doesn't really satisfy, so that was a relatively easy cut. So there you have it. Those are 15 2020 books that I have cut from my list and I no longer plan on reading. If you have read any of these, please let me know what you thought about them in the comments, whether you loved them, whether you hated them, whether I made the right decision, or if I should reconsider. So many books, so little time, you know what I mean? So if I don't cut any more, I'm going to end up having 40 books total from 2020. However, I may end up cutting a lot more, so we'll see how it goes. Thanks for tuning in, and come back and see me next time. Until then, keep turning those pages. Bye.